I don't know when I'm supposed to get started. Do I just get started when I heard that lady?
Yeah, you can.
Oh, I can now.
You can.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining on the last session, especially with all that competition I have across the way from Apple. I really appreciate it. Just to get a sense of who all I'm talking to, just curious, who all uses Workspace ONE right now for some devices? Any kind. Cool. That's a good amount. And then of the people that didn't raise their hand, who's used it before and maybe have gone a different solution before and you're still curious? Okay, cool. So it sounds like most of the room has some kind of understanding of the product and what we do. So I wanted to spare you guys the reset of explanation. My name is John Richards, and I'm a technical product manager at VMware, and I work on the Workspace ONE UEM platform, specifically on the Apple platform team, and I've been there for over 5 years working just on Apple. I started in engineering working on iOS, MDM back in iOS 7 days with DEP, implementing VPP, a lot of config profiles, and then moved into product management and specifically into macOS just over the past 2 years as we've kind of shifted from that old AirWatch strategy of mobile only to unified endpoint management with desktop. So I'm not a sales guy. I really do come kind of from an engineering side at heart, and so I don't want to come and give you guys a sales pitch. I really just want to talk about some of the cool stuff that we've been working on over the past 6 months, the things that we've released or are about to release, just to give everybody an understanding of some of the stuff we've been hard at work at. So this will be a view over the last 6 months. This is kind of the high-level bullet points of what I'll go through, and then we'll go through them in deep dive. A lot of it focuses on the catalog experience, the end-user experience. We released a catalog well over a year ago when we introduced our integration with Monkey, and since then that catalog has evolved to be a lot more, and also it's now combined with our agent package, so it's no longer two different apps. It's one single app that makes deployment a lot easier. And we've also done a lot of focus on some security enhancements. We did a complete redesign of File Vault, especially with all the fun troubles everybody had with Secure Token over 10.13 and 10.14. We worked with Apple to figure out the absolute best practice way of doing things, so that going forward encryption hopefully will be a lot less painful and a smoother process. So I'm going to dig in first to Intelligent Hub. We called this 1904. This is something that released in April. I'm sure you guys are aware that a lot of the vendors like us, Microsoft, are switching to this year, month format just to kind of make it easier to know when things were released. So 1904 came out, and really it was kind of up-leveling the existing AirWatch agent, simplifying that UI, making it a little bit more modern, taking a lot of the information in there that wasn't really relevant to end users, and making a clean experience that is starting to match some of the Apple human interface guidelines. And one caveat, this will require 10.12 plus. We're trying to reduce the matrix of our support just so we can start taking advantage of a lot of the new APIs that Apple's been adding, especially over the last 2 years. As part of this, really the biggest piece was the combination of the Workspace ONE Catalog app and the AirWatch agent into one single installer. So it's now one single app, one view. You don't have to deploy the agent and then get the other app on there some other time. It's all one simplified experience. And so that makes things a lot easier. And in case you weren't aware, this catalog is available across all the platforms we manage, not just the Apple platforms, but also the Windows and Android platforms. And it's we've done it in a way to try to make the same user experience across all the different platforms. And this catalog is not just native apps. It does show the native apps based on what platform it's being shown on, but it also shows your SaaS apps, anything you go to like Salesforce, Dropbox that needs some sort of SAML login. If you click it from this catalog, it's directly SSO'd into the catalog or into that app. We also have integration for Horizon and Citrix apps, so that if you have some legacy Windows apps that you need to run on Mac that just don't run on Mac right now, like Visio or Internet Explorer for those really old sites, or Putty, just things like that, those can also be initiated from the catalog. So it's a lot more than just the native apps that are powered by the Monkey integration. It's really any kind of resource that people need to do their jobs. Now, aside from the catalog, this app also contains something cool if you have our identity manager integration, and this allows you to sync in users from AD, from any kind of cloud IDP, and as long as they have attributes like what their manager is, what their picture is, we're able to paint this picture that we call people search that gives you an org view of everybody in your company and allows you to easily drill in, get their contact information, and quickly contact them, and it's all within that one app. So things in the future that we want to do is really make this even more native, inject these contacts into the contacts app, so then you can just do spotlight search for anybody you need to find in the company rather than having to go into Outlook and type their email and expect them and stuff. This whole catalog is brandable. Right now, being honest with you guys, I think there needs to be a lot more granular branding options. You can do about 3-4 different colors, change the icon and a few things like that. But it definitely needs more work to make it super brandable and customizable in every different way that people would like. One thing I was really excited about that we finally got around to adding that we've been requested for a while is a Commandline utility. This Commandline utility is not the robust Commandline utility that you might see from other vendors yet, but it does kind of set the foundation for where we want to take this, to be that tool for administrators or help desk to do some quick things via scripts or even on the device itself. So the first few commands that we've started with for this utility are sync, showing persistent notifications, and also some backend configurations that we used to have in the UI that really end users don't need to know about. So the first one is those backend configurations. Those used to be present in this old pre-1904 UI, and probably no one ever touched them. They were mostly used by troubleshooting scenarios where support needed to change something just to see if we could get any clues about some issue that was happening. So we've moved that stuff out of the UI into Hub CLI config, and you can see and set those settings there. We also added something that I think this is actually the biggest thing about Hub CLI is we added this piece called Notify. And this was heavily inspired by the open source tool Yo by Shay Craig. We have a lot of customers that really love to use Yo and deploy Yo, but the problem is you always have to have that chicken and egg where Yo needs to be on your machine at the very beginning so any workflow you have can use it. I think that there's a good contingent of people that know how to use Yo and download it, compile it, change the icon, and distribute it. But there's still a lot of people that just don't want to mess with Xcode re-signing things and pushing it out. So we took the same command line parser that Shay Craig used in Yo and put it into Hub CLI to bring some of the functionality that Yo provides. So some of the things you can do with that is change the title, subtitle, info text. You can add an action button that then does a bash script. So really quick example I have up here is a title that says, hey, launch this website in Safari, click the open button or launch button, and then it'll do a open Safari to this browser. So obviously I think a lot of you guys have used Yo before and you've seen the potential of being able to execute scripts from a user initiated action. So we're really hoping to see kind of what kind of creativity people can do with this and where we can take it further. But this is I think a first landing point for this CLI to start extending workflows and make them a little bit more custom. Now, one thing you might be wondering is if this icon is customizable. It's not, and that's kind of the reason why when you download Yo, you get that default icon and you have to swap it out in Xcode. It's because currently there's only, I think, a private API to switch that icon. So it's not something that we're quite inclined on building. And I think it kind of you get into a philosophical conversation because it could be abused. There could be some malicious script that's posting a notification that looks legitimate and directs the user to do something bad. So I think it's good that Apple has kind of restricted it to be this way. Maybe it'll change in the future, but I don't expect them to. The next thing we did was something that was born out of a lot of issues over the past year with FileVault and Secure Token and the way that we were activating FileVault at the time. We were not doing deferred enablement, which is MDM enables the FileVault when the user logs out or logs in. The user would get a prompt and they enter their password and everything turns on. What we were doing was we were asking the user for their password, username and password, and then putting that into FD setup and trying to turn it on. But when you get into situations, with secure token and things like that, that's where we start having to add a lot of error handling with that command, and it just got really messy. So we went back to the drawing board and talked to Apple, and they told us about deferred enablement and all the different options they had. And so we finally made that full switch, completely ripped apart that file vault profile, and now it's completely MDM based. Now, the thing about MDM-based file vault is there's still no enforcement mechanism. That profile can be on the device, and if the user doesn't log out or restart for 10 days, then file vault's just going to be off for that time. So we wanted to at least give a little bit of that enforcement. And so what we've done is we've split this profile into, this is the native configuration, that everything you get through MDM, and then as you go down through the profile, you get other configuration options that allow you to customize the experience that Hub provides. A lot of this was also inspired by open source tool Crypt by Wes, I think is who did it. Wes Whetstone. Is that right? Wes and Graham. So this allows you to do things like customize that initial notification that comes up saying, hey, you're going to need to log out. You can also give them how many deferrals they want, how often between those notifications, and then after X amount of times and dismissals, maybe you just force it on them because you just need to get it encrypted. But then in cases of where, this is the flow. You click log out, logs you out, enter your password, during that transition from login screen, and then you get your file vault key. Now, when the device is already encrypted and this profile comes down, there's really no MDM mechanism to rotate that key. It's already encrypted, and so the profile thinks everything's all good. So what we've done is the hub will detect whether encryption's enabled and this profile's down and ask the user for their password. And this prompt can also be customized. When they click enter their password, they'll get a prompt for that. And then what we'll do with that password is then try to rotate the key with FD setup. When that key is rotated, the next MDM sample is going to escrow it back. So it's a complete closed loop system. And also, those prompts can be customized. Even the success prompts can be customized. And then even lastly, the error prompts can be customized. Because we found that sometimes there are situations with encryption. Like, for example, we had a customer that encrypted all their devices with disk util. And then they tried to push down the file vault profile, rotate the key, and obviously that caused all kinds of weird errors and stack trace overflows and things like that. So we learned from an implementation mistake back when that happened, where it just kept prompting the user over and over again for their password, not handling that garbled response correctly, because we were trying to enable it in a non best practice way. So now we have the ability to kind of define how many times the user can try and fail before it just stops and gives the user a message, hey, you need to contact IT. Someone's going to need to touch the device, figure out what's wrong with your encryption. Maybe it's as simple as, you need to enable a secure token or something like that. So, that's an example of a prompt that you could do. You say, contact your IT, go to this Slack channel, open a help ticket with this keyword, and it'll route to the appropriate place. And then the idea is once the administrator can touch the device, fix what's going on with the encryption, you can use Hub CLI to just kick things back on. This is something that we were about to release. I put in the corner 1907. This is something that's coming out in the next week or so. This is finally, we're adding file vault key rotation. So if I ask the room, whenever you guys have users that are locked out of their machine and they need the file vault recovery key to get back in, how do you guys give it to them? Do you email it to them? Maybe? Do they bring it to you and they give it to you on a sticky note? Or you Slack it to them? Some way that key is going to get leaked. So really, the next question is, how many of you guys remember to rotate that key after you've given it to the user? Probably not many people. There really hasn't been a clean way of doing it aside from running a script, feeding the password in. So Apple actually added an API in MDM to rotate that key. But we were thinking about the use case further, and you give the file vault key to the user, and then once they're done with it, you should rotate it. So rather than giving a button to rotate it, why don't we just automatically do it? So This feature is going to be a hard security stance from us that we would like to start enforcing for all the different secrets that you can have for Mac, like the admin passwords, firmware passwords, firewall keys, where when you view it, you should be viewing it only when you absolutely need it. So once you view that key, a timer starts, and 15 minutes later, a command's going to get queued to rotate that key. And so what this allows for is giving out the secret, but knowing it's going to get resecured without having to do anything. Yeah, that's something we don't have yet, but this is kind of the foundation of the model we want to take for all these different kind of secrets. If with the new MDM command, as long as you have the previous firmware password, then you can change it. Yeah. So this is also something that we have added to our self-service portal. Self-service portal is something that's a little bit different than Hub. The long-term vision is to bring everything into Hub. But right now, self-service portal is a place that people can go to repush profiles like SMIME certificates, even wipe their device if it's a BYOD device. They can go to this place and view their recovery key. So if you imagine a flow now with this feature, a user's locked down on their Mac, but their iPhone or their iPad is enrolled, they can go to self-service portal, go to their Mac, view the recovery key, get into their Mac, and the security team knows that 15 minutes later that key is going to get rotated. It's a complete self-sufficient cycle where the user won't ever have to contact you guys to get recovery keys. So moving on, another security feature was finally the addition of the smart card payload. This is something that a lot of people are starting to switch over to with YubiKeys and things like that. So Apple has a profile that allows you to define that experience, how strict the validation rules are, what that experience is when the smart card's removed, like enabling screensaver and things like that. So that key is finally, those keys are finally in the console. The entire payload itself requires 10.12.4. There's a few keys that require like 10.13.2 and 10.13.4. But generally, anybody who's on 10.14 should be able to use this payload with ease. Another thing we added was the screenshot restriction. This is something that a lot of education and healthcare people have been asking for, especially because it has really great implications for DLP. This prevents users from taking screenshots of the device or capturing the screen with things like QuickTime or Camtasia. So this is a nice little, really simple feature from Apple, but very powerful and valuable, especially from a security perspective. And rounding off, this is something we're about to release. It's kind of a multi-phase effort to improve the troubleshooting experience of Hub. So anybody who's been a customer over the past few years, seen sometimes we have issues with deploying software, deploying things, and you'll be asked to grab logs. And it's always been a manual, get a zip, upload it to somewhere, give them the link, and it's a cumbersome process. So the long-term vision for this is to have a button directly in the console where you can just say, give me the logs. Give me the logs for the Hub, or give me the logs for macOS overall. But we didn't have enough time for this release, so what we did is did a short-term quick thing and added a new command into Hub CLI that allows you to send those logs. So this is kind of the first step that we're taking to really try to trim that troubleshooting experience. We're also finally switching over to the new logging frameworks that Apple has, so everything will be streamed into memory rather than on disk. We're going to come up with a kind of our own sysdiagnose, our own kind of debug profiles that can persist data. So there'll be a lot more options on how we can get troubleshooting information without making it too verbose if you guys want to look at logs too. So that's a lot of stuff that we've worked on over the past 6 months, and I didn't want to take up too much time just going over features, and I really just wanted to open up the floor for questions from me because I know a lot of the stuff that we do we've just been doing for so long, and we maybe don't talk about as much as we should. So maybe you guys have questions about some of our functionality or what's coming up, and I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, Mike? Mm-hmm.
With the local admin account, the MDM, would that be included?
Yeah, yes. So in case somebody's not aware, in the DEP process, you can define an administrator to be created either hidden or visible during that process. So that actually becomes the 501 user, and then the user you create and set up system becomes the 502 user. that 501 admin, we actually get the password, and MDM now has a command to be able to change that password. So what we're going to do long term with that feature is, one, add in a tick box to generate that password randomly per device, give a ability to set a scheduler for every X number of days to rotate that key, and then also add the same kind of mechanism as the file vault key, where if that secret's viewed after some amount of time, it just gets automatically rotated as a way to just kind of keep those secrets secured as possible and only leaking for a small period of time.
This is awesome. I was asked for that last week, and I was like, I don't think we can do it.
Oh yeah, it's possible. It's just a matter of finishing it up. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the catch box.
That's all right.
Making sure it's on.
Speaking of DEP and the DEP created admin account, I have a service request in on. We discovered that when trying to use that, there were some forbidden characters apparently rooted in a not escaped library or something. And somebody in support, or no, actually it was Rob, told me that apparently this is something that has gotten fixed and gotten broken again and gotten fixed and gotten broken again.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could offer anything on that.
Yeah, I do remember that issue coming by. I'll have to check and see where it is right now.
Okay.
But I remember there were some keys that I think had accent characters that weren't getting localized and translated to whatever it is in that binary representation when it gets to the device, and then converted to the right character back on macOS. So feel free to Slack me afterwards, and I can trace it down and make sure everything's good.
Thanks much.
Yep.
Will we have the ability to create more than one admin account?
So what we try to do is stick with the MDM profile. It's probably not something we're going to be adding into the product turnkey in the near future. What we do have is we have some feature requests open with Apple to be able to do that via MDM. Part of it is because we really try to refrain from building features around command line tools that are not API driven. So it's definitely possible to push down a script to create an admin, but then there also has to be a mechanism like Laps to rotate those keys and do everything. It's just not as simple as the current MDM implementation. So I would be curious to hear, I guess, some of the more the use cases that you're looking for with additional admins that can't be created through DEP, or if that's just a limitation of not having DEP devices. But it's not completely out of the question, but it's not something that's a current priority for us. Jeremy? Ooh, strong arm.
So you had talked about the diagnostic logging as a short-term and a long-term solution. Can you explain a little bit more about what's there as a short-term and what's there as a long-term?
Yeah. So over the past few months, we've been doing, I feel bad for our engineers, they've been just pouring into the logging statements for the past few weeks, just cleaning them up, making them more readable, deleting a lot of that kind of tracing activity that made them so verbose, and also then adopting to the new OS log framework. So that way logs can be viewed on disk or directly in the console app. So that's kind of the first step, is just to kind of reduce the size of logs in general. But the larger thing is getting those logs to troubleshooting, to help desk or whoever from that device. So what we're doing in the next few releases on the console is adding a button directly into device details where you can just request those logs, set the verbosity of it, enable a debug mode where it'll push down a profile, just like the ones you get from Apple support to kind of enable persistent data on.
Are those just for Workspace ONE, or the actual debug profiles from Apple for the different subsystems?
Yes, so we'll build in the debug profiles for Workspace ONE, but that is a good idea, to maybe loop in some of the typical Apple profiles like Manage Client and things like that could also turn on system logs. One thing we do have to be cognizant of is privacy, especially in our European countries. So what we're also doing to kind of help ease some of those concerns is whenever the admin requests logs from the device, the user is going to get a prompt saying, here's everything we're going to send. Do you agree to send it? And this is something that I think we'll cover a lot of the bases on the GDPR side. So when when it comes to system logs, that's where it really starts getting into the PII game, where there's a lot more information in there that wouldn't be in our hub logs, that we want to make sure the user's well aware of what they're sending. But it's not out of the question. It's just a matter of, it's really more of a how much data can we transmit to the server at once.
So the initial options you have now are just for the hub logs?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you anticipate moving further into application logs, like Microsoft Outlook has a troubleshooting log?
Yeah, I mean, not opposed to it. It's just a matter of building the APIs, making sure, because a lot of these logs go into your content file storage. So there's also limitations there, and how big those files can be.
Okay, thanks.
Right now, when we are managing Android app, for example, and when we go to the app config part, you pre-fill all the key available for the apps. Like, for example, if you do app config for Android on Outlook, all the key available are already there, and you can just fill it or remove it.
Yeah.
Is there any plan to do the same thing for iOS and macOS, having at least the well-known apps preset somehow?
Yeah, there's not a short-term plan for it, but it's definitely something we want to do. I know something we've been really tossing around is kind of a curated catalog within Workspace ONE. So rather than you having to upload all the files, we can potentially integrate with auto package directly to use recipes that pull down the files, and then add on some value on top of that pulls in the app config keys and allows you to set them. Things that I'm thinking about, especially for Mac, are like Chrome, Firefox, Nomad, things like that already have a lot of keys people can set through config profiles. And then one thing I'm excited about that we just recently heard from Apple that wasn't announced at WWDC is that app config command is available for Catalina. So that's a pretty huge announcement, I think, that we definitely want to test out to see if we can just adopt the same framework as iOS and use that same UI. But long term, definitely want to make it a lot easier to discover those keys, because I know there's not a lot of documentation out there besides appconfig.org. So yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mike.
Forgot it. I'm sorry.
It's all good. You can Slack me. Yeah, if anybody's not aware, my Slack on Mac admins is just JR. So it should be pretty easy to remember. Feel free to send me anything whenever you have any questions.
Jeremy was sad that he didn't already take a JR, but as it turns out, he still could because multiple people can have the same.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I have a question in regards to the restrictions profile. Is it going to get more robust so that, for example, we block the sharing application so that customers can't go in there and change those settings?
Right.
But there are certain settings we may want to give them access to. So if we could allow the sharing under system preferences, but restrict their ability to change some of the settings within the sharing, that would be beneficial in our environment.
Yeah. No, you're right.
That's pretty much all Apple under Apple control, right? Which you can do.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what that XML is like, because I think you have to first say allow or disallow, and then you define the entire list. I don't know if you can do an allow list and a deny list at the same time. So if that is possible, then that's totally a valid feature request that we could do. You can? It's not. Oh, it's not. You can write it, but it's not supported. Okay, so I guess that answers the question. Oh, it does. Okay, cool. So I guess in the interim, I would say, custom XML. You can just create that restrictions profile, view the XML, and then copy just the system preferences piece out. But I think that'd be a great thing to follow PR on. It's a good idea.
Actually, I've already done that, but I just didn't know if it was making its way through.
Okay.
Yeah, I put in a feature request, so.
Gotcha. Okay. One other thing that just reminded me when you said that, we are switching to a new PR process that'll give a lot more exposure to what's in the pipeline. We're switching to a tool called Aloha, or AHA, I think is what it's called actually, that allow people to submit ideas, and then people, +1, vote them up, and then that can kind of turn into a roadmap that people can visualize. So right now we're in the process of taking all the PRs that are in that backlog and converting them over to AHA so that then they can get more of that exposure and help us bubble up in the priorities. So look out for announcements around that over the next few months.
So for that new PR process, is there the possibility of making those not public?
Yes. Yeah, you
or
can
at
do
least
private
not who
PRs
submitted
too.
them or something like that?
Yeah, you can do private PRs too.
Okay.
Yep.
Did have a profile question, actually.
Mhm.
I know there's a profile where you can turn off the lock for when asking for a password when screensaver kicks in.
Right.
Is there one to actually turn off the screen lock function?
I think just by not setting it, that would do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually tried it. Granted, Hopkins is finally upgraded to one of the later versions, but in a previous one, even contacting VMware, we couldn't get it to work.
So you want to not lock the screen
Yeah, we
at
have one
screensaver.
lab where we actually logged the user in previously. It's
Yeah.
out Anatomy Lab, so I don't want people touching the computers with
Mhm.
grimy hands. So we pre-logged them in, but we never want this to lock the screen.
Yeah, that should be possible.
locked it.
I know screensaver in particular are one of those weird keys that have multiple keys across payloads that can affect the behavior.
Yeah.
So it might be that you have a login window and a security privacy that are kind of fighting against each other, and the more restrictive one always wins.
Okay.
But I would think it's possible. It's just by simply not setting that key and making sure there's not another profile that's making it lock.
I think it's not that you want to prevent locking,
Mhm.
but you want to keep people from being able to lock.
Oh, you
Well,
want to gray
actually,
out
no,
that
I mean,
ability?
I sort of want to unlock, make sure it stays, the screen stays unlocked. Like if you went into the preferences panel now and you uncheck that little box, you'll get that prompt saying, do you want to turn screen lock off?
Mhm.
That's what I want to do.
So you want it to be you want to be immutable
Yes.
option. Yeah. Yeah, MDM profiles are kind of weird where, a lot of them they make them immutable, and then sometimes it's just, it sets it, but you can still change it. So that's probably something, if you haven't already, raised with Apple. Although I know from a security standpoint, they're always going to balk probably and say, why do you want to keep these machines unlocked? So there's always that game to play, but it should be possible. Maybe bumping energy saver settings as well, if these are machines that are always plugged in, that keep those things, the displays on. That might also do the trick.
Yeah, and for your use case, you actually have a command line on macOS, caffeinate. You know this command? So basically, it's when you start it, it never return, and be sure that your Mac never go to sleep. So you can actually run this command line as a launch agent when the user log in. The command line is started, and so the lock screen never came in, regardless of the settings.
You don't necessarily want to prevent sleep, you just want to prevent lock.
That's worked on.
Yeah, it's just.
So yeah, caffeinate, maybe something else to look at. All right. Any other questions? Jeremy?
I know there's,
It's surprisingly difficult to throw.
Yeah.
you have to have been a speaker to really get the practice, I think. Kind of related to some of the other profile questions and some things that have been posted in some other forums, has VMware thought about having maybe more task-related profile setup rather than the current categories that Apple kind of encourages based on their reference profile manager?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
so you're
then,
saying kind of abstracting out the name of the payloads
like,
and making it
I
more
want to do,
use
I
case
want to
driven.
enable, disabling iCloud wherever it is, or I want to manage all the screensaver settings wherever they are, and then build that specific profile.
Yes, I mean personally, I would love to do it. To be honest, it's a
a
monumental
different
effort
mode,
to
yeah.
to completely rip apart the entire profiles framework and do it. One thing that we want to do that I think might lay the foundation for that is make those profiles more dynamic. Because right now, anytime a new key comes out, that's a version upgrade. So something we've been doing, and we actually did it on the Chrome side already, was it's called dynamic. It's called dynamic data-driven UI. And so the idea is that all of the keys, the description, what type of fields they are, everything is contained in some data structure that's in the cloud. And every console is reaching out to that one endpoint that then consumes the keys and paints the UI based on what's there. So that way, that gives us the ability to just update one cloud instance of all of the keys whenever a new key comes out, and all the consoles get it instantly. So when we have a framework like that, then the UI can be painted in any way we want, and that would give us opportunities like, abstracting multiple payloads into like one, single payload that's driven for, a specific use case like screensaver, things like that. So it's not something we're probably going to be able to get to this year, but it's something that we are working on kind of, under the hood in parallel.
Are you aware of the GitHub-based config profile reference?
The one that Mosen did?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's great.
I mean, we may be using that as a source for some of the things.
Yeah, that's something we looked at, and there's also, if you go into Apple Configurator, if you dig deep into the plist, they kind of have, it's pretty close. It's not quite as granular as the Windows policies are, but I think it's something we could definitely use. But we would want to get a little bit more control over what the tooltips say, what the labels are, what if it's a checkbox, is it a toggle, things like that. That's kind of the level we want to get to, so the UI is completely automatic and painted based on that configuration. So that's something we've 100% looked at. It just looks like the plist as they exist right now from Apple's side are not quite there, and it just requires a lot of hand rolling and updating those profiles to give all the metadata.
And speaking of like updating and some of the compositing of profiles, would you consider only putting keys in profiles that have actually been set, like having an option next to each key so that you can actually enable that key or disable the key so that it doesn't appear?
Yeah. Again, those are all good ideas. It's really right now we're limited by the current UI and deciding whether we want to pick up an entire profile refactor or work on some of the other bigger items that are kind of more pressing right now. Like scripting, for example. Scripting right now is something I think is probably our weakest point. Currently, you can do basic scripting through product provisioning file actions, but we want to build a whole brand new configuration for that. So profiles is kind of taking a little bit of the back burner on that compared to scripting and app deployment and things like that. Once we start switching to that DDUI thing that I was talking about, I think we should have some more conversations about what's possible there and what people are looking for. Because I personally would love if my vision, if I take myself out of the picture of being a vendor, I would love to have a profile where you can just select exactly what keys you want and nothing else. And you're not creating payloads based on this pre-canned list of all the keys that have these default values, and if you don't look at every single one, maybe you're setting something you don't know. It should be a lot more selective.
Yeah, it's very much like what Profile Creator is doing now.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's just it's a big effort for in terms of development wise. So we want to make sure we get to the bigger hitting stuff first.
Thank you.
Cool.
Did you remember yours?
Yeah. So right now, in order to do custom settings, you need to, if you already have a profile, like maybe you export it from Profile Manager, you download it off of GitHub, you need to copy and paste like a middle section.
Yeah, the interdict, yeah.
Are there any plans to just be able to upload just a paylist?
Yes. Yes. I feel that pain. Yeah, I feel that pain a lot. Yeah. Especially it doesn't work well with certificates because the certificate UUID is changing every time you save it. So when you go to take it and put it in the XML, it's already changed because you've regenerated the profile. Yeah, it's not good. It's not in the place where it needs to be. We really want to take something like what Xcode has or Profile Manager. You can upload your own profile. It'll consume it and allow you to change on top, or you can just build it right in there and define all the different keys in a much more like key value pair format rather than raw XML. So yeah, that's definitely on the roadmap. Probably. I don't think it'll get done this year, just the way we've been trending. WWDC is keeping us really busy. We are working on a lot of stuff. As you all know, there's so much that came down the pipe this year. So that's kind of shifted a few things back, but it's something I want to get to early next year if we're not able to get to it this year.
Sweet, thanks.
Speaking of WWDC, do you have maybe a time frame for things like the user enrollment?
Yeah, user enrollment, that's being worked on heavily by our iOS teams. As you know, that's major for user enrollment. User enrollment for Mac, we're not seeing a lot of value of it right now. All you get is the ability to sync your iCloud notes. And if you look at user enrollment, it requires a managed Apple ID, which requires Azure AD. And anybody who's using Azure AD is probably using Office 365, which is probably using OneNote. So the value of syncing notes is not quite there. We'll have the bare minimum support, but I don't see anybody using it. Does anybody have BYOD Macs in their environment? Right. So, I mean, 99% of the time, user enrollment is just not going to be something that anybody's interested in a Mac perspective. I think once, some of the different IDP providers get added to manage Apple ID, they start, creating more of that data separation on the Mac, then it's going to be a lot more viable. But that's something, I think we heard from Apple back in Vancouver. It's just they had to ship one thing at a time, so iOS took the priority. So Mac is just not really in a place to devote any development time to, because we just know it's not going to get used in production.
I mean, just as feedback, I'm aware of environments where there are BYO Macs, but they haven't been managed in any way because of this kind of issues.
Yeah. So I think
it's interesting to be able to possibly be able to do that.
Yeah, and it could totally enroll them, but you won't be able to do anything with it right now just because it's so limited. So I think the better way to go about BYOD in the current state is to we have the ability to kind of define the ownership type, which will, if you pick employee owned, for example, it'll really downgrade those access rights that go on the MDM profile. That kind of create a faux user enrolled scenario where we're not collecting managed apps, we're not collecting the managed certificates, things like that, trying to keep it as managed items only. So that'll be probably the way to go, at least until user enrollment becomes much more robust for macOS. The things I am excited about for macOS though are activation lock and the DEP customization stuff that you can do for logging in, locking the username, and being able to populate that admin's user's name in a way that can be unique.
Talking about WWDC news, do you have any insight of the future you can share about support for this web-based authentication in DEP, and what should we be able to do with Identity Manager in the middle, like maybe supporting YubiKeys for authentication and things like that?
Yeah, I know that. So that's not something that my team is working on, but it's being worked on by our core mobile teams right now. So yeah, they're building out the full kind of capabilities of the web view. You'll be able to supply, your SAML endpoints so that it, will just redirect to, that authentication screen. So if your SAML provider has two-factor, then everything should work. And then aside from that, I know they're also looking at use cases like, needing to enter extra information. So I think it's probably going to be a multi-phase where we'll take our existing web enrollment flow and put that into a web view. And then over time, really start to tailor that for that DEP experience, giving people the ability for more customization there. But out of the box, once we ship it, it should have all the basic support that people would need for the more advanced authentication methods.
on that topic, do you know if you are going like, if we go SAML with Workspace ONE at this time, you have 2 targets, one for SSP, one for admin. Do you know if DEP will be another target or it will rely on the SSP?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
Let's follow up offline and I'll see if I can get that answer.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I think this is awesome. Really good questions. Appreciate it. And like I said, join me on Mac Admins. We have a channel called AirWatch that a lot of people have been posting questions. I'm lurking on and off and try to chime in when there's questions I know maybe others won't be able to answer. But of course, you can DM me at JR as well if you have any other questions. Yeah, so about a year ago, I created the Workspace ONE channel just because I knew eventually that day would come, and we haven't done it yet. I don't know what the right process is to take a channel that has 1,200 active people and just say, okay, use this now.
Well, just rename the existing
So I
one.
delete the one and then just rename it?
You can
Yeah.
rename it.
Yeah,
I
I didn't make it, so I guess that's part of the problem. Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. It's just a matter of pushing the button, I guess.
Just to ask about this Slack, I think it's to ask about the Slack channel. It's all the admins are in it.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Is that something that would be a lot easier going forward if we renamed it by now? I figured there's part of the problem is I came from the AirWatch startup days, so I still have love for the old name, and I know a lot of people still call it AirWatch even though the name is pretty much gone. So yeah. No comment on this. Blame marketing. So yeah, we can change it. There just really hasn't been a big outcry to do it. I think everybody's been finding it pretty easily. But
Are you going to be at VMworld?
yes, I will be at VMworld. Myself and I don't think he's in the room now. Myself and Robert Tarakitis, he's on our technical marketing team. We're going to do a session on kind of 1 hour, zero to fully set up on a Mac. Just kind of show how to set everything up in the console to get a basic onboarding and enrollment flow going. I don't have the name of it. I could get you the number of it in the catalog afterwards, and then I hope so. I think so. Usually they videotape them. Yeah.
Would you expect a lot of content regarding Workspace ONE at that show, or just 1,000 seconds?
So VMworld's massive. It's funny. I always forget how big we are until I go to VMworld every year. So there's hundreds of sessions, but I know there's probably going to be at least 50 to 60 on Workspace ONE, and then a handful on Apple specifically. Yep. This session? I think so. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Have a great rest of the day.